Right at the start of this season, which was incredibly almost a year ago, I made a video on who I felt was the best player in the history of every Premier League team. At the time, a fair few people requested that I do a similar video for the rest of the EFL, but that would take an absolute age. So I thought I'd just do the Championship, and if this video were to do an awful lot better than I expect it will, then I would happily roll out League 1 and 2 versions. Just so we're all on the same page, there are a number of factors taken into account when determining greatness in the context of this video. Whilst talent is obviously a key factor, it is not the only factor. George Best may be the most talented footballer to have played for Fulham FC, for example, but he was past his best when he played for them, and he only spent a season at Craven Cottage, so I wouldn't consider him to be anywhere near the club's greatest ever player. Longevity, along with importance and influence upon the club, are all taken into consideration along with a player's talent, as is the level the team was playing at when a certain player was playing for them. If a team has joint top scorers tied on 200 goals, one of whom scored them in the 5th tier and the other in the 1st tier, it's probably reasonable to assume the one who scored them in the 1st tier was a better player. Also, the title says of all time, so I mean of all time, not in the last 10, 20 or 30 years. Here is every Sky Bet Championship club's best ever player. Barnsley. Neil Redfearn. We begin this video with relegation threatened Barnsley, who are a great example of a club whose all-time greatest player is not their most talented former player. Tottenham and Aston Villa legend Danny Blanchflower is the most gifted footballer to have turned out at Oakwell, but he spent just 2 seasons in South Yorkshire, and he is followed by the brilliant and remarkably prolific Tommy Taylor, who left Barnsley for Manchester United and died in the Munich air disaster at the age of 26. It's a battle between Neil Redfearn and Ronnie for the title of Barnsley's GOAT, and whilst Glavin was the better footballer, it's Redfearn who I'd lean towards on this one. He starred for the club for 7 excellent seasons, firing the club to promotion to the Premier League and almost keeping them in the top flight through his remarkable drive and talent on a football pitch. Rumour has it that he would have won the Premier League Player of the Year award had Barnsley survived that season. Birmingham City. Gil Merrick. From Trevor Francis to Bob Latchford, Birmingham City have been blessed with some brilliant footballers over the years, but no one has surpassed Gil Merrick in Blues folklore over the last 60 years since he hung up his gloves. Birmingham are a club with a proud tradition in terms of goalkeepers, but Merrick stands out even amongst an esteemed list of former number ones. Birmingham born and raised, Merrick lost his early years to the war, but he still went on to become the club's all-time record appearance holder. Merrick starred for Birmingham during some of the club's best years, reaching the FA Cup semi-final and finishing as high as 6th in the First Division, and he also won 23 caps for England between 1951 and 1954. Blackburn Rovers. Bob Crompton. A very honourable mention is owed to Alan Shearer at Blackburn Rovers, despite the fact that he only spent 4 seasons with the club. Shearer scored 130 goals in 171 games at Ewood Park, at a time when he was the best centre-forward in England, and his goals fired Rovers to a Premier League title. That's not enough to make him the club's greatest ever player, as far as I'm concerned though, since Bob Crompton can go a little further than that. A world-class fullback and a strong candidate for an all-time England 11, Crompton spent his entire career at Blackburn, where he was born, with the exception of guest appearances for Blackpool during World War I. He led Blackburn to not 1, but 2 top-flight titles, and in terms of talent, achievement and longevity, he's the obvious choice at Ewood Park. Brentford. Jim Towers. Brentford have had an impressive array of talent over the years, including a number of excellent players during the latter stages of their careers. Honourable mentions for the Bees go to David McCulloch, Jimmy Bloomfield, and more recently Terry Evans, but Jim Towers is still yet to be knocked off his perch in West London as far as I'm concerned. Born in Shepherd's Bush, Towers began his career with the Bees, spending 7 years at Griffin Park, during which time he scored 163 goals in 282 games. An incredibly prolific marksman, Towers scored for fun wherever he played, but he spent the bulk of his career with Brentford. He is the Bees' all-time record scorer, and in 2013, he was voted as the club's all-time greatest player, quite rightly so, in my humble opinion. Bristol City. John Attio. I might have to start being a little more terse with my descriptions to prevent this video going on forever, and I can start that at Bristol City, where it's a very easy decision. As brilliant as post-Leeds Norman Hunter was at Ashton Gate, the Robins' greatest ever player is undoubtedly John Attio. Signed in 1951, having made just 2 league appearances for Portsmouth to date, Attio spent the entire rest of his career in Bristol, scoring an incredible 351 goals in 645 games. That makes him the Robins' all-time top scorer, and Attio also bagged 5 goals from 6 caps for England. Cardiff City. Alf Sherwood. Honourable mentions in the Welsh capital of Cardiff go to Fred Keenor, IVOR ALLCHURCH, and I feel as though a quick word should be said for Peter Whittingham, who tragically passed away earlier this year at the age of 35. Cardiff's greatest ever player, unsurprisingly, is one of Wales's greatest ever players too, and that man is Alf Sherwood. A short but strong and intelligent fullback, Sherwood played 381 games for Cardiff, he won 41 caps for Wales, and Stanley Matthews considered him the toughest opponent he ever faced. That's coming from a man who once locked horns with the great Nilton Santos, so finer praise won't be found anywhere. Charlton Athletic. Sam Bartram. Some may point in the direction of Keith Peacock, but I don't think anyone can genuinely hold a candle to Sam Bartram in terms of all-time great Charlton Athletic players. Simply put, Bartram ticks all of the boxes. He was an exceptional goalkeeper, he is Charlton's all-time record appearance holder, and he spent virtually his entire career in the First Division. When Bartram broke through at the Valley, Charlton were in the 3rd tier. He swiftly helped them to reach the First Division, and they spent his entire career there, before being relegated the season after he retired. That says it all, and Bartram is also England's greatest uncapped goalkeeper, prevented from winning an official international cap by World War II and the brilliance of Frank Swift. Derby County. Steve Bloomer. Derby County can rival almost any championship club in terms of the talent of their former players, whether it be Roy McFarland, Archie Gemmill, or Rach Carter. And yet, when it comes to the Rams, there is still no one who comes close to the great Steve Bloomer. Considered by many to be the finest player of his day, Bloomer scored 332 goals in 525 games for the club, making him comfortably the Rams' all-time record scorer. Bloomer's legend goes well beyond the walls of Derbyshire though, since he was even more prolific for England, bagging 28 goals from 23 caps, and he remains the second highest scorer in the history of English football's top flight, trailing only Jimmy Greaves, a full 31 goals ahead of Alan Shearer, despite having played 36 fewer matches. Fulham. Johnny Haynes. In Bedford Jesard, Bobby Robson and Charlie Mitten, Fulham had one of the best forward lines in English football during the 1950s, and all of those players deserve honourable mentions here. It was the man supplying them, Johnny Haynes, who is Fulham's undisputed GOAT though, and in truth, it isn't really close. Pele called Haynes the best passer of ball he'd ever seen, and he was perhaps the finest playmaker in world football prior to an August 1962 car crash. The injuries ended Haynes' England career, but the nation's first 100-pound-weight footballer continued to star for Fulham for another 8 years. Huddersfield Town. George Brown. Huddersfield Town have had some world-class talent, ranging from 1966 World Cup winner Ray Wilson to future Ballon d'Or winner Dennis Law. I find it hard to overlook someone from the Terriers' finest era under Herbert Chapman though, when they won 3 consecutive top-flight titles. George Brown was the star of that side in many respects, scoring a club record 159 goals during 8 years in Yorkshire, as well as netting 5 times from 9 caps for England. Hull City. Ian Ashbee. Despite the fact that it is my club, and I know the history of Hull City quite well, this was still one of the toughest selections in this video. Strike partners Ken Wagstaff and Chris Shulton tend to come out near the top of any polls of Hull City fans regarding the club's greatest ever player. Meanwhile, Rach Carter is undoubtedly the most talented footballer to have donned amber and black over the years. Ian Ashbee isn't fit to lace Rach Carter's boots in terms of talent, I hope you won't mind me saying, but I still consider him to be the Tigers' greatest ever player. Ashbee captained Hull City from the 4th to the 1st tier of English football, the only man to have done so in English football, coming back from what doctors felt would be a career-ending injury in the process. A warrior, a leader, and a Hull City legend, and at any other club, he would have a statue outside of the ground. At Hull City, he doesn't even get free tickets. Leeds United. Billy Bremner. Yet again, the best player to have played for Leeds United is John Charles, but when discussing Leeds' greatest player, you cannot overlook the Don Revie era. Honourable mentions go to Charles, Peter Lorimer and Eddie Gray, among others, but the beating heart of that brilliant team, and the man who drove it forward time and time again, was a little Scot named Billy Bremner. A terrific footballer, Bremner was tough, skillful and diminutive. He spent 16 years at Ellen Road, winning 2 First Division titles and making 776 appearances, limited only by the regularity with which he was suspended. A small man in size, at just 5'5", but a giant of Leeds United. Bremner is Leeds' all-time greatest player. Luton Town. Mick Harford. Luton Town have yo-yoed from the First Division right down into the non-league game over the years, but their crowning achievement came in 1988 when they won the League Cup. My choice as the Hatters' greatest ever player is the man who led Luton's line with distinction in the mid to late 1980s, former England international Mick Harford. Harford is a bona fide Hatters legend who now works as the club's chief recruitment officer, and honourable mentions at Kenilworth Road go to fellow centre forward Steve Howard and, of course, the great Gordon Turner. Middlesbrough. Wilf Mannion. Middlesbrough quite possibly have the strongest candidates in terms of former players of any Championship club. Certainly, they are among the top three, and those names include the likes of George Hardwick, Graham Souness, George Campsell, Brian Clough, and Juninho. Sadly, there isn't enough time to discuss any of them in depth, and ultimately, all are pipped to the title of Borough's GOAT by Wilf Mannion. Nicknamed Golden Boy, Mannion was a blonde-haired, born footballing genius whose feints and body swerves gave defenders many a sleepless night. One of the most gifted football players the English game has produced, Mannion spent his early 20s fighting in Italy and France, but having survived World War II, he returned to these shores to become a legend of the game, both in Middlesbrough and beyond. Millwall. Teddy Sheringham. Millwall have had a number of fine forward players over the years, but arguably none finer than Teddy Sheringham. Sheringham began his career at the Den at the age of 16, and he spent the next 8 years starring in East London. In total, Sheringham scored 111 goals in 262 games for Millwall, before going on to star for Tottenham, Manchester United, and great rivals West Ham, among others, in a career of remarkable longevity. Nottingham Forest. John Robertson. Often referred to as the fat lad on the wing by Brian Clough, John Robertson never looked like a world-class footballer, but that is exactly what he was. An artist on the ball and an absolute wizard in terms of his deliveries into the box, former Forest captain John McGovern described Robertson as being like Ryan Giggs, but with 2 good feet. The Scottish maestro is undoubtedly one of the most unappreciated and underrated British footballers of all time, but not by the people of Nottingham, who have repeatedly ranked Robertson as Forest's greatest ever player. Even for a club that has had the likes of Stuart Pearce, Roy Keane, Peter Shilton, Des Walker and John McGovern over the years, no one comes close to Robertson. Preston North End. Tom Finney. Not only was this the easiest decision in this entire video, I would go as far as to say that I don't think there is a football club on earth whose greatest ever player is more obvious than Preston North End's. Another man who lost his early years to the war, Finney emerged as one of Britain's most talented footballers before the conflict came to an end. He spent the next 14 seasons, 12 spent in the First Division, as one of the best footballers in Europe. Playing on the right for Preston and on the left for England, Finney had a bit of everything. He was skillful, inventive, a great provider, and remarkably prolific for a winger in his era. In total, he scored 200 goals in 473 peacetime appearances for Preston, and 30 goals from 76 caps for England. Having regularly competed for the First Division title, Preston were relegated the season after Finney retired, and they haven't returned to the top flight since. Queen's Park Rangers. Stan Bowles. QPR have had lots of great players, such as Rodney Marsh, Jerry Francis, and Les Ferdinand. Meanwhile, a special mention must go to perhaps the club's finest servant, Alan McDonald, who is another player in this video who sadly lost his life far too young. QPR's greatest ever player, though, as far as I'm concerned, has to be Stan Bowles. An incredibly gifted footballer and one of British football's great mavericks, Bowles could play in central midfield, attacking midfield, or up front, but wherever he played, he brought immense joy to spectators with his technique, flair, and vision. Bowles spent 7 seasons at Loftus Road, scoring 97 goals in 315 appearances. Reading. Robin Friday. I must admit that this is a bit of a dubious one, on the grounds that Robin Friday doesn't necessarily meet the criteria of a lot of the other players in this video, given that he spent just 4 seasons at Reading. Considered something of a lower league George Best, although that could be considered a little bit disrespectful, Friday was a remarkably gifted footballer with a destructive personal life. He scored 53 goals in 135 games for Reading, winning the club's top scorer and Player of the Year award in his 2 full seasons with the club. Friday's personal problems inevitably spilt over onto his on-field performances, and he left Reading in 1976, retired in 1977, and was tragically dead by the age of 38. Sheffield Wednesday. Andrew Wilson. There are lots of names I could throw at you in regards to Sheffield Wednesday, from Roland Nilsson to David Hurst, Chris Waddle, and perhaps most famously of all, the great Derek Dooley. Ultimately though, it would be absurd to pick anyone other than Andrew Wilson, despite the fact that 100 years have passed since his final appearance at Hillsborough, aged 39. Wilson spent 20 years at Sheffield Wednesday, scoring 217 goals in 560 games. That makes the former Scottish international Wednesday's record scorer and appearance holder to this day, and he was the team's talisman as they won 2 First Division titles and 1 FA Cup in the early 1900s. Stoke City. Stanley Matthews. Stoke City can rival the likes of Derby County, Middlesbrough and Leeds United in terms of having the most outstanding candidates for a video like this, and yet it remains one of the easiest decisions I'm ever likely to make. Stoke can name the likes of Neil Franklin, Dennis Smith, Freddie Steele, Jimmy Greenhoff and Gordon Banks among a remarkable list of club legends, but Matthews is a legend to end all legends. He ticks every possible box by my criteria. In terms of ability, he is not just Stoke's, but arguably England, Europe's and one of the world's best ever players. In terms of longevity, there is quite literally no one who comes close in the entire history of the sport, with Matthews retiring at the age of 50, still playing in the top flight, and in terms of importance to Stoke City, I'm not really sure I need to expand on that one. Stan Matthews is a man almost without peer in the entire history of the English game, and he is both Stoke City's greatest player and the greatest player in this entire video. Swansea City. IVOR ALLCHURCH. He earned an honourable mention for Swansea's bitter rivals Cardiff, but IVOR ALLCHURCH spent more years and better years with Swansea than he did at any other club. A masterful inside forward who gave defenders nightmares and drew rapturous applause from supporters, ALLCHURCH spent 11 years with the Swans, scoring a club record 166 goals in 445 games. Honourable mentions go to the likes of Mel Charles, Cliff Jones and Trevor Ford, among many others. West Brom. Ronnie Allen. I think a lot of people would consider Jeff Astle to be West Brom's greatest player of all time, and a strong case could certainly be made for the Baggies legend, but I put him just behind Ronnie Allen, with honourable mentions going to the likes of Laurie Cunningham and Jesse Pennington. Ronnie Allen was a superb forward who spent 11 years at the Hawthorns, during which time he scored 234 goals in 458 games. A really well-rounded forward, Allen was equally effective out wide or through the middle, and the Staffordshire native scored the goals that won West Brom the 1954 FA Cup final, and he almost inspired them to a First Division title during the same season, bagging a whopping 34 goals in all competitions that season as the Baggies finished as First Division runners-up. Wigan Athletic. Leighton Baines. We end this video, by virtue of going in alphabetical order, with crisis-ridden Wigan Athletic, who are going through an awful time of things right now. They are also probably the most difficult club to pick an all-time great for in this video, given that the club has spent most of their history in the non-league game. Harry Lyon was long considered the Latics GOAT, but Wigan were playing in the Cheshire League when he was scoring goals for fun during the 1960s. I think Wigan's greatest player has to come from their greatest era, during the 2000s, and for that reason, I'm going for Leighton Baines. Born in Merseyside, Baines joined Wigan's youth ranks from Everton's, helping the club to 2 promotions in 4 seasons, which saw them reach the Premier League for the first time. 2 superb seasons in the Premier League prompted a return to Everton, but Baines will always be fondly remembered for his excellent form at the DW Stadium. So that's it for today's video. Thank you all for watching as ever, give us a like if you enjoyed the video, let us know your thoughts down below in the comments, and feel free to subscribe to HITC Sevens.